Hello, everybody. The nice people at Finovate Asia have asked me to talk a little bit about COVID and cashlessness. And so I thought I would try and do that in three parts, really. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the general trends in that direction. I want to illustrate, the direction of travel there anyway. I want to talk a little bit about why I think the focus really isn't on from cash to contactless, as a lot of people say, but from cash to contact free. And I want to talk a bit about the implications of that. And then I want to say what I think the real impact of the virus on cashlessness and contactless is, which is the virus has or is forcing us to actually have some national and international strategies for cashlessness. Here we go. So let's first of all talk about the high level approach. Oh, I should say, by the way, even for someone who is as pro-cashless as me, I don't want to spend any time talking about how cash can carry the virus and cash can kill you. I mean, I know that's one of the reasons why people aren't using cash. But honestly, I do genuinely think your chances of catching the dread virus from cash are actually quite small compared to other transmission methods. Warning, this does not constitute medical advice. But I would also point out that everything else carries virus, cards, point of sale terminals, everything basically. So I'm not going to make a big point about that. I'm going to talk in three chunks. I'm going to talk about accelerating the drive for contactless transactions and how the virus is not creating a new direction there, just accelerating what was already there. What that future that's pushing towards might look like, and then finally this point about the cashless society that we want. So let's begin. So what I did to start was, first of all, think about what the impact of the virus on financial services as a whole would be. Here's my model of a financial services organization that I always use for this kind of thing. And if you look in the middle at the payments, you can see it's not great. Obviously, the payment volumes are going down, and as you'd imagine, e-commerce is going up, but not enough to replace what's missing. So if we just focus in the middle on payments and ask ourselves, what is the virus doing to payments? Well, you wouldn't be surprised to see. I mean, I looked at a few different people's projections of this, and I mean, it's similar, and it's all what you'd expect. The people that have been hit really hard cross-border. I mean, that's actually been devastating. I was talking to a friend of mine who's actually the CEO of one of the foreign exchange companies, and he said they'd seen more than 90% reduction in transactions. Life is very difficult for them at the moment. But then nothing that you would nothing you'd be surprised about. Note the point about embedding financial services, the idea that instead of having separate payments apps or whatever, we embed financial services inside other applications. We'll come back to that a bit later on. One particular kind of payment has been hit very hard. It's sort of payment I was quite interested in, and this is payments for the gig economy. So particularly in Asia, you see like a third of the transactions drop away. So the Uber and Grab and all this kind of thing, and this is very difficult because I think the virus, although it's nothing to do with payments, I think the virus is showing us something about how we need to reorganize things, because the gig economy has caused particular problems when you go into this kind of downturn. It's very difficult for the government to provide support and to help. So gig economy payments I'm interested in, but for a slightly different reason. But because I'm old and conservative, I naturally go to the Bank of International Settlements to see what they say about the whole thing. Again, nothing you'd be surprised about, but I do want to flag up 2 points that they make because they feed into my narrative here. So the first is they're talking about encouraging the transition to contactless payments. I don't think that's quite right. I think what we're seeing is accelerating a transition to contact-free payments, which is something slightly different. And secondly, they say it's about shifting towards digital payments, and I agree with that completely. And as you'll see a bit later on, one particular kind of transition that central banks are now looking at digital currencies, I think has some real implications. So we'll come back to that a bit later on. Anyway, so that sort of sets the general picture of what's happening in payments. But I thought I would look for, you know, a narrative to tell a little bit of a story about this trend, just to make it clear what I think the trend is. And so I thought I would use beer as my organizing principle. I happened to be thinking about beer at the time, and so you probably are having had to sit through this now. But so I thought I would talk about beer as my organizing principle. So I'll show you what I mean. So this is a few years ago. This is what I used to think was the best pub in the world, because it was the closest pub in the world to our office, the Keystone in Guildford, and we went over there. We persuaded them to go contactless, and it's reported in the local papers. It was such a big deal at the time. But so a few years ago, we were paying for beer with contactless cards, with mobile phones, and some of the early mobile phone experiments, pre-Apple Pay and that sort of thing. Stickers, watches. I had a contactless watch, which I liked very much. Used to pay with that all the time. And so, you know, buying beer with contactless isn't really very new or very interesting. Is that the future? Well, no, it isn't. Because a few years after we were buying beer contactlessly, we find ourselves in the iPub, as I used to call it. This is actually the Bear in Stamford Street in London. I'm not sure if it was the first iPub in London, but it was certainly one of the first. So here we are having a few drinks in the iPub. And what you'll notice about the iPub is the tables all had contactless readers in the middle of them. So you could pay for your drinks by tapping the middle of the table. And they also had beer pumps on them, which is super convenient. And they had iPads, and you could order food and drinks and things using the iPad. And I thought this was a very interesting experiment. The reason I'm showing it to you here is because, and I wrote a blog post about it at the time, is that one of the conversations I remember after this with some of our guys is we were thinking, well, you know, this was fun and it was great. It was nice beer, actually. But it's in London, everybody in the pub had a smartphone. So what was the point really of having the iPad, and what's the point of the intermediary? Why have contactless or any other kind of POS terminal? Why have the iPad or any other kind of organizing device? Why not just let people use their smartphones? And, you know, this was the kind of strategic context, the advice we were giving to clients at the time about that their strategies should be more focused on as I started putting it, app and pay and not tap and pay. And I was annoying people on Twitter going on about app and pay. But anyway, I think this was the right, you know, this wasn't some sort of crystal ball prediction. You could see what was going on. So then we move forward a few years and we see Britain's, I think they're the biggest pub chain in Britain, Weatherspoons. They go over to their app, and people start ordering their food and drinks through the app. And what was interesting about this is, I mean, I thought this was an interesting example to show because it, you know, proved some of my points. But I was kind of hampered because I've actually never been in Weatherspoons, and not because I'm a snob or whatever, but it's just not I haven't been to Weatherspoons, right? I'll come out and admit it. So I thought I would go and find someone who actually does go to Weatherspoons and quiz them about it. And fortunately for my random statistical survey of people who go to Weatherspoons, there was one of them living in my house last weekend. So I went to ask my son. So have you been using that Weatherspoons app then?
I've been using it since it came out, which is 2 or 3 years ago now, I think. Yeah.
Your mates use it?
Everyone I know uses it. Most people use it.
Why?
Well, because the queues at the bar are always way too long, and if you order on the app, I think it's partly because you've paid for it then and there. They treat your order with more, they treat it faster. So they'll come and deliver drinks to tables and food to tables, sometimes quicker than people who are waiting in the bar just to get their drink. And I think part of that is because someone who's paid on the app has already paid, whereas someone who's in the queue to buy a drink, hasn't paid, so they don't necessarily owe that customer anything as of yet.
Huh.
But everyone I know uses the app because, also if you leave your table for a second to get a drink, someone will nab your table. So people do it for convenience, they do it for hygiene, so you don't have to go and handle cash at the bar. You don't have to leave your seat as soon as you sit down, so you can go straight and find a table. You don't have to wait at the bar and order your drinks and then go and look for a table and then there not be a table.
But this was before the virus, right?
This was long before the virus, and I think people appreciated the hygiene element of it then, and even more so now.
So as you can see, using the app is pretty well established. It's not and I'm actually, in a way, I'm kind of surprised that more retailers didn't go in this direction, because I think you see, the thing is, when you stop people paying at a bar with cash or debit cards, and you start using the app, what you get with the app is data, and that's so crucial, to companies like Weatherspoons, knowing, at an instant who orders what and what they like and what they don't like. It's fascinating. So when I was putting this talk together, why was I thinking about that? Because, life is very difficult in the UK at the moment. The pubs are shut. The government wants to reopen the pubs shortly. In fact, I think they're going to announce it tomorrow, but I had to record the video today. But according to the newspapers here, part of the strategy for reopening pubs, to do with social distancing and new hygiene, is going over to apps instead of having people standing at the bar. So we've gone from, in my little history of beer, we've gone from buying beer with contactless to buying beer with apps plus contactless plus cash, of course, to basically buying beer with apps. And that's sort of an interesting microcosm of the story about the transition. The COVID virus wasn't accelerating a transition to contactless. It's accelerating a transition to contact free, which in a way begins to harmonize Europe and Asia, and this idea that you do everything on the app. It's not the subject of this talk, which apps are, but the idea that you do everything on an app. Yeah, that's where we are. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means two things. I think, first of all, it means I don't understand. This is a story I read in the newspaper a few days ago about fancy new biometric ATMs. You don't need a card. You can just walk up to the ATM and it will recognize your face and give you cash. And this, to me, seems a little like, as they say, it seems a little bit like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. When that picture I showed you of us paying contactlessly in the pub years ago, at that time, cash was about 2/3 of retail transactions in the UK. It went under 50% a few years ago. Going into the crisis, I doubt it was even a third. I mean, let's just say it was a third, but I mean, I doubt it was. It was probably 30%, maybe even less than that, heading towards 25%. Right now, it's probably about 15%, if that. And the newspapers are full of stories about how some communities are being left without ATMs, and people are finding it hard to access to cash. But you can see why that is, because as the number of cash transactions falls, the cost of cash infrastructure, not just the ATMs, but every shop with its tills and counting up cash and depositing it, and vans full of cash driving around all over the place to fill up the ATMs, security guards. I mean, all of that infrastructure falls on fewer and fewer transactions, and the per transaction cost goes up. So how do you protect people who need to work in cash? Well, this seems to me to be an expensive way of doing it. The alternative would be to find ways of moving them away from cash, not find ever more expensive ways of allowing them to continue their cash habit. Because the thing is, it's not good. People who are trapped in a cash economy face the highest transaction costs anyway. It's the people that are stuck in cash that can't get good deals online and can't do e-commerce shopping, and they're the people whose cash gets stolen and all this sort of thing. So I don't think this is the right way to think about it. I think what we should be thinking about instead is saying, look, we can already see from places like Sweden a bit of a backlash starting, because there cashlessness has just happened. It wasn't planned, it just happened. And when it just happens, some people get marginalized and excluded, and that's not good. That's not what we want as a society. So what we should do as a society is actually have a strategy towards digital money instead of just letting it happen. And this comes from something I presented. Well, actually, I first wrote about it in my book, Before Babylon, Beyond Bitcoin, which came out in 2017. And I took this way of thinking about a cashless strategy to Money 2020, actually, in Europe in 2017. I presented a manifesto for cashlessness, which is where this comes from. And so what I did was I said, well, let's have a look at the key issues around going from cash to cashlessness, and then let's organize those in a way that sort of makes sense to begin formulating a strategy. And I came up with these 4 areas: criminal activity, social impact, control and regulation, and money supply. And I thought, well, those 4 areas, we can bring experts together who can help us to formulate strategies in those areas, and from that we can build up our strategy for digital money. And I stand by. I think it's a good idea. But the point is, it's an idea. The point is, what the virus has done has not accelerated the trend to contactless. It's accelerated the trend to contact free. It's accelerated the arrival of cashlessness in certain places and certain areas. But most importantly, it's accelerated the need for a strategy towards cashlessness. And that's my point. I think what the virus has done has shown us that we need a strategy towards cashlessness. And that's what we should be spending our time on developing now, an actual strategy. And the reason for that is because what we want is a strategy to deliver what society needs, if you see what I mean. Not a technology strategy that, how can we make Ethereum more efficient, or what's the best chip to use for something or other. That's not what we're talking about. If you look at the big picture, we have a very interesting and odd situation. So I've picked the US and China for my examples here. So both the US and China are unusual cases. In other words, I'm not sure we could, so in the UK, for example, or anywhere else, I'm not sure we could found our strategies on what's happening in the US or what's happening in China. They both have very special circumstances, but we can learn from what's going on in both of those places. And it seems to me sort of interesting that I can't help noting the irony of it, in the same week that the US began mailing out physical stimulus checks in the post, in China they began testing a digital currency in 4 cities. And I think that means something. And I think what it means is that we have to really think about where we're going next with this. The fact that central banks are now looking at central bank digital currencies and the actual replacement of cash in circulation with digital currency means something. And it's going to happen. In the UK, the Bank of England's original report on this said, I think they said that a 1/3 reduction in the cash in circulation and its replacement by a digital alternative would mean a GDP boost of something like 4%. And we really need a GDP boost right now. We really need one. And that comes partly from reducing friction in the economy because you're replacing cash with a much cheaper infrastructure. But it comes mainly because you're replacing cash, dumb money, with smart money, with money that has an API, money that can be used as a platform for delivering all sorts of new products and services. When you put those 2 things together, that's why you get the GDP growth. Well, I hope that was useful. Thanks very much.